Hey people, welcome back to the channel. This is a story in which Madara is Naruto's grandfather. He implanted his and Hashirama's cells into Naruto and trained him, which made him extremely strong. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the video, leave a comment if you want to suggest fanfic. Check the description for credits and support the creator of the story. So let us begin. Chapter 49. A calm morning for the Emperor. Worry-free, no amount of noise brought into his ears by a crying child. It was starting up like one of those days he could just doze off while relaxing on his throne. But it wasn't going to be like that. The usual routine was mightily disturbed when his senses picked up something moving dangerously towards the city. He had been alarmed. They might be in war. He hadn't thought that anyone would dare attack his city like this. The energy beams coming towards the city were headed straight to the royal palace. The place where Etsu lived. He may not have accounted for something like this happening, but it had to be dealt with, and then he would kill whoever threatened his peace like this. Threatening the life of his Itsuko was a sin punishable with death. No one was going to be forgiven for crossing that line. He had not even threatened any other village with destruction like this. The emperor shook his head. This was war. What did he expect? Anything could go when people were fighting a war. He was being a child, being surprised that someone would do what he wasn't willing to do. Onoki had done it before and now the Raikage was doing it. Damn cages. Still, it didn't mean that he had no right to be angry over the threat to his people. Innocent people for that matter. If he hadn't been here, this attack would kill thousands of people. While in the comfort of his throne, Naruto raised some of the divine trees he had planted, just to try to block the beams before they could reach the city. It started with a frown when the emperor came to a realization that nothing was going to stop those beams until they hit something hard. He grew infuriated at the thought of some monkey putting his child in danger like this. Yugao, Samui, they were all inside the palace. Attacking him like this was just a blatant poke at the container of his wrath. What was more infuriating was when he realized that there were more attacks coming in the city. By people. His eyes within the city spotted some dangerous activities within the city, by people he called his subordinates. Traitors. At this rate his palace was really at risk. Etsu. The thought came back again. No one who put his child in danger was worthy of forgiveness. Only death awaited. Further, this was his holy ground, his high place. The appointed ground of a god. To think that someone would be daring enough to attack this. This would do much damage to the palace and him, of course. As his attempts to stop the beams failed, Naruto grew infuriated when he picked up a third attack. There was a disturbance in the ground that was outside his country's walls. Diversion tactics. He hadn't thought that it would do something so daring. He was infuriated. The man had the guts to attack him like this. He should also have the guts to stand him in battle. The idea was possibly to have him sacrifice himself protecting the city while another attack was mounted in all corners. Ironic. They planned for him to die in a similar way his father died. It was infuriating. He had done everything to make sure that he wasn't forced to go through something like that. Did they know that Itsuko existed? If they did, who could have told them? Was it a rat in the capital? So much for loyalty. If they knew and had planned for an ironic death, leave his child fatherless like he did. Probably suffer like he did. Obviously, the world would hate her for being his child. She would go through what he did. Subconsciously, the disturbed thought of him caused his power to leak out of him without even realizing. He didn't even notice when the truth-seeking balls started to spin around him. He only became aware when Karen bust into the throne room. Naruto quickly burst through the roof of the royal palace when it became obvious that he had to face the beams head-on. He had to risk it. Naturally, nothing could kill him, but the three attacks bothered him. His enemies had prepared for war while he took comfort in his immortality. Perhaps knowing that he couldn't die made him careless and ignorant of other things. What did he have to worry about when he knew no one in this world could kill him? Naruto stared at the hundreds of beams rushing over to the city in blinding speeds. His Rinnegan perceived the danger that he faced. From afar, the attack didn't look this menacing. There were hundreds of dangerous beams and he knew they could pierce through his body. These fancy weapons had this ability. For the first time in many years Naruto felt threatened. The feeling was good to his battle-loving person, but it was downright devastating to the father in him. The damn things could turn the city into a cloud of smoke, and with his loved people in it, they could be destroyed in the process. He couldn't allow for the beams to touch the city. The results would be catastrophic if he allowed something of that nature to occur. He would destroy this whole world if his city was destroyed because mere humans could stand to live with him, despite doing nothing to threaten their existence. They were willing to go this far. This kind of position made him recall once more again the kind of position Minato was put when Obito chose to release the Kyuubi to attack Konoha. He had to protect his village, and in turn, he sacrificed himself for the safety of his village. Here he was, he who hated making sacrificed. It wasn't the city that he wanted to protect wholeheartedly, it was his family. Someone had threatened their security, and that made him angry. Naruto held out his right hand. He wanted to send the beams away to another dimension, but there were too many of them. He wouldn't be able to send them away in time. He had been too arrogant to think that no one would attack him like this. He had ignored everything thinking no one could create a weapon that would threaten his family's existence. He couldn't watch the city be destroyed either. His family may come above, but at this moment, he realized that he did care for this city he has built. It was his home, they were his people, people who depended on his power for protection, people who left other homes to live here in the city of Rice. At that moment, the emperor was to acknowledge that it meant something to him. Even if it was a small feeling, it was something nevertheless. He had to protect his family and the city, by taking the hit himself. That blasted raikage, Naruto growled, clasping his hands. The perfect Susanoo came to life, causing the city to come to a standstill as the giant hovered above the royal palace. Shinobi were already alerted of the looming danger, so they were busy moving about the streets, trying to gain order and control things as they could. A perfect Susanoo wouldn't be enough to shield himself from power that could destroy this whole city. Naruto armored himself further by making 4 of his truth-seeking balls form the shape of a round ball around himself to protect himself. The remaining balls attached themselves around the Susanoo, blackening it. Furthermore, inside his black cocoon, Naruto held out both his hands, Shinra Tensei ready to be activated. In not more than 3 seconds later, the Susanoo moved towards the beams, and the two forces collided. Boom! The city trembled slightly as a window-shattering shockwave tore through the beautiful city. Panic rose as windows shattered around, people screaming, trying to take cover over something that didn't have anything made of glass. Above the city, where the two forces collided, a black cloud had gathered, the monstrous Susanoo no longer visible. There was just the black cloud that hovered above, nothing falling down the city, except for the shockwave that caused the city to tremble. It was a kind of shockwave that had Karen worried as she expanded her senses. If that explosion had occurred within the city, it would have killed many people and destroyed a lot of buildings. A normal person couldn't have survived that. But Naruto was okay, right? Although she couldn't feel his chakra because of that smoke, she believed he was alright. He was Uchiha Naruto. Still, that didn't stop her from being worried. Looking around the city while standing atop of the royal palace with Shinji, Karen saw the city come to a standstill as everyone looked up. The realization of what had just happened dawned upon them. Many had their hands pressed together around their chest, looking up. They knew. They knew an attack had been launched at their city. They had seen their emperor take the skies to defend the city. They had seen their king collide with those beams of energy. And now, they were safe, but the view of their king was clouded by a black of smoke. Karen looked up at the sky. She released a sigh of relief. Naruto was okay. Not a second later, his body, surrounded by a black mist, came crushing down the ground. His second fall. It was rather nostalgic for Shinji as he could remember the last time the emperor had fallen from his sky palace, and now he was falling once more. But this time, the whole city was watching. It was unacceptable, but it couldn't be helped. Besides, a part of him thought it was a good thing. The people knew their king had risked his life for them. Their trust in him would only grow. What are you waiting for? Haisuke said, as he appeared on the roof. Looking a bit out of breath. We have to be by His Majesty's side. Have you secured the royal family? Shinji asked, a bit urgently. No matter was happening, the safety of the family came in first. It was their job to protect them. The emperor would actually kill them all if they failed their jobs. The good thing here was that the emperor had absorbed the attack, and only the result of the attack had caused minor damage to the city, but the royal palace and the crystal palace still stood firm. Haisuke nodded. Do you want to be in safety, as well? He asked, looking at Karen, who was part of the royal family. I want to, Karen said, but I'm needed. My power rather. Haisuke nodded. Let us move out then. That said, the three disappeared. XXXXX Naruto could faintly hear the screams of the people filled with dread as his body was being pulled by gravity. The holes in his body were slowly closing, at the cost of lot of chakra. If he were to be honest with himself, he nearly died up there. The Susanoo had absorbed most of the attack, but it was not enough. His truth-seeking proved ineffective, because of natural chakra. Shinra Tensei did more harm than good. The force of the explosion, combined with the jutsu had nearly tired his body apart. He had never felt so much pain. If it wasn't because of his pride, the great emperor would have let out a pained scream. He didn't try to regain any balance as he focused on regenerating his wounds. Perhaps he was telling himself he had a choice in the matter because he wished not to wound his pride. All his power was diverted into healing his life-threatening injuries. So he allowed his body to crash down in a crowded street. His crash wasn't as booming as the last one, but the people still winced as they gathered around him. His shinobi were quick to move into the scene to make order. No one was talking though. They held their hopes in their hands. Perhaps they worried because of the blood on his kimono. It was a strange feeling to know that his people were worried for him, his safety. Konoha never gave him such. The village would have been grinning at this moment, they would be moving to finish him off because they hated him. They wanted him dead. But his people, they were worried. He could feel their thoughts around the atmosphere. He wanted to smile. Just knowing that they worried, it gave him a strange, yet pleasant feeling. Kiri would probably give him the same reaction if this had happened in the village. Despite hating him right now, Mei would probably be over him, shouting for medics for come over and treat him. The thought made him smile slightly. Yes, she would do that because she cared. Suddenly, forming those bonds, and creating this empire didn't seem so bad. Right here, he was surrounded by people who cared. Tolerating these people hadn't been a waste after all. He may not have been trying to act like a hero or anything, but he had given them a home, and for that they were grateful. If Etsu was at that age, she would have been worried for her father, she would have been holding her breath. The thought made him frown. He didn't want such a position for her. The generals quickly surrounded his form as the silence filled through the entire city. Everything stopped moving until the emperor raised his right hand, stretched it up a bit. He wasn't fully healed, his left hand was missing. Still, the city released a breath of relief, and smiled as a whole. Slowly but surely, Naruto got to one knee. His body was sore, he may have partially healed but the fragile body of his had taken much more damage than it should, and that made him frown. It only meant that he wouldn't fool around in the battlefield. He was only going to kill the enemies. Before that, he needed chakra. At least the family was safe. Haisuke had been there. He was happy. The city still stood and he had yet to kick the bucket. Yet he couldn't smile. Without getting new chakra, he couldn't fight. He wouldn't be able to fight. At this stage, he was weak. Karen must have realized as well, judging by the look she was giving him. Heika, Haisuke started, as the city watched. Faintly hearing Haisuke's voice, Naruto calmed his breathing. He had an image to uphold. I underestimated the enemy. The wall has been breached and they are marching towards this city as we speak. Everyone heard him and there was a collective gasp from the people. Has everyone been secured? Yes. Everything is perfectly fine, Haisuke said. Naruto closed his eyes for a moment. Secure the city. Don't leave the Karen, make sure no one sneaks around. We have not received the report, Your Majesty. Who is the enemy? Shinji asked. The Raikage and his army. Stay here to protect the city. Some enemy might try to attack in my absence. Not might, there was an enemy attack that would reach the city. He wasn't just going to say it aloud in front of the people. That would cause unnecessary panic. We will do as you command, Your Majesty. Good, Naruto said, getting up on both his feet. He examined his body further. What of your hand, your majesty? It will be fine. That explosion nearly tore my body apart. If it hadn't been for that Shinra Tensai, which blasted most of the blast away from me, only my kimono would have dropped here, Naruto said flatly. Everyone tensed at those words. I will deal with I will perform a massacre. Simply defeating them will not too. A massacre will soothe my tense intestines. Yes, he said it like that and disappeared afterwards. Is it just me or is his majesty pretty mad? Someone from the shinobi asked. He is, Shinji said, looking at the sky. His majesty doesn't massacre his opponents. He likes to fool around with them. Before ending it, as he finished, his tone was just flat. He is most likely going to be quick about it, Hisuke added before falling silent for a few seconds. Anyway, we need to prepare the city should there be another attack. But Hisuke knew there was another attack. The emperor had gone on to deal with it quickly so he can return to protect the city. He trusted them to hold their own in his absence. Best option, Karen said. I will go to a quiet place and stretch out my senses until the emperor returns. That said, the Uzumaki disappeared. Shinji called for calm and for the people to be at their homes. They would not go as far as to evacuate everyone to a safe place while they fought, unless it becomes necessary while they fought. He and Hisuke returned to royal place where the latter asked something, nay, Shinji. Now and Kotaro. They didn't react as we did, and his majesty didn't include them in his promotions. We were trained to become generals as them. We were treated equally before, but over the past 2 years, his majesty has pushed them out of this place and pulled us closer, Hisuke said in thought. I wondered about that too, Shinji said. But for now, we have a city to protect. Let us worry about that first. His majesty will return shortly. You don't want him to find us still here while the enemy advances. A's company boom. The emperor crash landed in the midst of thousands of shinobi from Kumogakure. The moment he landed, panic rose as roots burst forth from the ground, spreading from all his sides. Whoever they touched, they sucked them dry of their chakra. Screams rose as men tried to flee away from the roots while others tried to cut them off. But when you tried cutting one, another burst forth. Within a minute, hundreds of shinobi were already lying on the ground, skin deathly pale. Don't let them touch you. They are attracted to chakra. The more you fight, the more aggressive they become. How are we supposed to deal with them? They just pierce through a normal barrier. Naruto was protected roots which were supplying him with much needed chakra. Just stood still in the protection the roots offered him, filling his reserves, while the shinobi screamed and shouted commands. The raikage cut through his roots in lightning speed and reached him within a second. The muscled cage landed a brutal punch on Naruto's chest that sent the emperor flying away from his men. Naruto landed a distance away, put on an impassive mask while dusting himself up a bit. Gritted his teeth seeing the damage Naruto had already inflicted without even lifting his hands. The man had already disabled hundreds of his men with that wave of assault. It was ridiculous. This is why this man's existence was an abomination he had to erase. Even it meant selling his soul, would take the chance, as long as it guaranteed that the man was killed in the end. A pity no one came in with that kind of an offer. A and Killer B moved ahead of the men, facing the emperor. The Yondaime Raikage put on a grin on his face, his lightning cloak still active. His grin was in place because he knew exactly why Naruto chose the tactic. He needed chakra. The first wave did its job. There was no way the man would fight at his best after taking the hit. It was impossible. I was sure of it. This is why he could afford to grin despite the fact that hundreds of his men were dead already, all in the name of feeding the emperor. How did you like my surprise? I didn't like it. I found it to be rather daring and provoking, the emperor responded flatly. I didn't think you'd keep me busy while breaching the walls. The diversion worked splendidly well. I must make your death a reality for working so hard for this surprise plan. I only laughed in response. Did you think that I would be foolish enough to think of meeting you in a battleground of your liking? If you thought this was going to be one of those wars we spend days in the battleground, then you got it all wrong. The longer we stay in the battlefield with you, the more you cut down our numbers and our chances for victory decrease. But in this case, they held the advantage. Naruto had already taken too much damage. He couldn't afford to stay longer in the battlefield. I was willing to sacrifice his men to hold down the man in a fight so that they could weaken him further. He wouldn't have the time to stop the attack going on at his city. All in all, everything was good for him and his side. So you planned to hit it all in one go, Naruto said. I was thinking my allies would be attacked as well. But you don't care about them, do you? You only want me. Bingo! Exclaimed loudly. Going after your allies will only exhaust resources. There is no needed to go after them. They are worthless. If we bring you down, we bring them all down. Cut off the head and you kill the snake. They were convinced to ally with the Imperial Kingdom because of the Emperor's power, and once you cut off that power you cut their link. They no longer become a threat, the Emperor said. What are those from Iowa? A's grin twisted. I guess there is no harm in telling you. Some of them are attacking Konoha as we speak. It is for their own petty hatred. Some of them will attack your capital city. Naruto narrowed his eyes slightly. So the reason the portal that brought you all here was opened outside the country was because you wished to lure me out of the city. How thoughtful of you. Naruto held out his right hand. It wasn't as if he hadn't suspected it. He did. Hence he had left Hyusuke and Shinji at the capital to protect it while he removed the bugger threat. A portal opened up above ground and spat out the bound daimyos. I hadn't planned on killing them. But you have committed a sin. No one will leave this massacre ground alive. As he said those words, gusts of wind picked up around him. So sign of his truth-seeking balls though. Amaterasu, and just by that, the lords were consumed by the eternal black flames. While their painful screams caused some men to cringe, a merely continued to smile. They have no use in war. It is unfortunate that they died, but that doesn't make them any more useful, the Raikage said with a shrug. Do you actually think you can massacre us? I see your arrogance knows no limits. There are more than 3,000 men behind me, do you think you can kill them all? You foolish child. You underestimate the powers you're going against. I'm in no mood to be teaching children how to dance, he clasped both his hands. In the next 2 minutes, only a handful will remain. Naruto didn't listen to the Raikage's retort. Mokuten. Deep forest emergence. Take cover. Bring in the heavy hitters in the front to execute the plan. Barked the orders. They'd come prepared for most of the jutsus known to the Emperor. There are some they couldn't deal with and some they could handle. One such as this, could be handled without any loss. It would take some chakra, but he had the men to cover up that loss of chakra. Mokuten. Devouring forest emergence. In the second jutsu, the Emperor slammed his hands down the ground and stayed like that. The devouring forest worked like deep forest, but it was much of a larger scale jutsu and the forest devoured everything within it. Unlike the deep forest emergence, this jutsu shook the ground before it burst forth in the middle of the large army, spreading in all directions. As long as Naruto kept supplying chakra, the forest would continue to spread out in all directions. One could say the jutsu's limit was how much chakra he could give out. As the forest devoured many, I could only curse as the forest continued to expand at an alarming rate. If he didn't stop it, it would end many of his men. This just reminded him of how the Shodai Hokage was said to have created the forest that surrounded Konoha. This was a barren ground, and if this man continued to expand his jutsu, it would fill the whole place, his men devoured within it. Asama, C said. We can stop the jutsu by stopping him. As he is supplying chakra to keep the forest growing. The Raikage didn't need to be told twice of what to do. Within a second, he was already in front of the Emperor, slightly above a ground, with his right foot aimed at Naruto's head. The sudden attack from the Raikage had caused Naruto get to his feet. To what was a surprise to the Raikage, Naruto grabbed the kick with his right hand. The ground beneath him shattered under the force of the kick, but the Emperor didn't move an inch, nor was he even looking at the Raikage. Stay away for 1 more minute, I want to continue with the slaughter, Naruto stated, Shinra Tensei, that blasted the Raikage away from the Emperor. Naruto jumped up, speeding into the crowd of enemy. As he landed in the Sea of Shinobi, he didn't waste time before slamming both his hands down the ground. Mokuten. Divine Tree Formation. As the ground shook, Naruto took to the air, and stayed there. A large tree sprouted from the center of the army, standing tall above them all. 4 more smaller ones sprouted in all corners. That seemed like mouths formed atop of the trees, the large one had about 4 holes around its top. All holes began to charge, an energy formation A and B knew too well. Asama. C muttered with wide eyes. This didn't look good at all. Cut the damn trees before they finish charging. A shouted, a sense of dread creeping into his heart. You can try cut them, but it won't be any use. You can use your time wisely and just runway, Naruto said, still hovering above ground. Naturally, I would like it if you struggle. It's pleasant that way. The Yondaime Raikage cursed the bastard Uchiha. How he wish he could just knock out that man from their air. His men struggled but it was no use. Anyone got closer to the trees was slaughtered by the roots that started to form around the trees, blocking anyone. Jutsus being thrown did nothing to halt the charge. The roots kept sprouting from the ground. It was like fighting against hundreds of clones. You get rid of one, the other jumps in. Within a second, 8 monstrous balls, more like tailed beast bombs were fully formed. Even worse, black flames lit up around the bombs. How are we supposed to deal with these? Some men asked, looking around. The damn things had cornered them. I knew he was powerful, but I did not expect this. This is not a battlefield. This is ridiculous. We are going to die. Those things are tailed beasts bombs. We didn't train to shield against them. At this range, we can't outrun them. As some dropped their weapons, some attempted to run, but no one got far. The emperor had said no one would leave. The bombs were released in all directions. Boom. 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 8 explosions tore through the thousands of shinobi in a blitz of black flames, and the ground shook under the amount of power that had been released. Dread-filled screams and many being vaporized, the emperor stood still, watching it all happen. Although he didn't want to smile, he couldn't help himself. The fireworks were just brilliant. The fools had expected him to just charge at them blindingly. Idiots. Did they think he would always fight? Like a battle-starved soldier. Still, the explosions painted some good memories inside his head. It reminded him of the time he lit up the grounds in Kurigakure during the Civil War. Ah, the good days. To conclude things, Naruto held out his hand, his Susanoo flared to live. Instead of its usual dark orange, there was a mixture of pure black around. Its Susanoo transformed until it reached its perfect form. Its wings flapped as it crashed down the ground. The Susanoo took out one of its blades, a single swing wiped through the explosion. The energy released by the swing tore through like a sudden wave of cutting wind. Naruto watched silently as smoke filled the area. As he started to see those craters formed by the divine bombs, he smiled. This reminds me of that brutal battle I had with Madara and Sasuke, he said to himself before releasing his Susanoo. That took 3 minutes, Naruto said to himself. Oh well, no one will remind me I said only 2 minutes. Besides, the result is quite satisfying, he smiled. Naruto narrowed his eyes. Lariat. Both B and A shouted as they went in for their killer jutsu, A in the front and B coming from behind. A killer jutsu that was surrounded to chop off the emperor's head, and Naruto blocked it. Both his hands were stretched out, touching each of their right shoulders. Both felt an invisible force hand stopped them and was restraining them. When I was fighting Madara, I was able to block the blade of his perfect Susanoo. Mind you, the swing of a Susanoo can cut through a mountain and Uchiha Naruto blocked it, the emperor stated flatly before adding with a question. Do you think that I would be unable to block this? A growled, cursing hatefully at the emperor. I hear you, but you said some people will be attacking my city, right? I can't waste time here. I will not dance with you, but I will end you and continue with the massacre on the other side. Just then, 2 hands burst forth from the ground, but Naruto was able to jump up to avoid it. However, this momentarily loss of concentration freed both A and B, who reacted quickly and quickly touched him, both on the chest and at the back. The touch was rather forceful, palms were open. Shinra Tensai. Once more, Naruto blasted his enemies away from him. However, a sudden feeling enveloped him as strange marks begun to spread out from the back and front where A and B and touched him. As Naruto landed on the ground, the marks were all around his body, restraining him beyond movement, he couldn't even blink. Inwardly, Naruto frowned. He couldn't break free from the seal and it was restricting his control over his chakra. This is why he hated an enemy who knew Fuinjutsu. It was damn troublesome. In his arrogance, he hadn't thought that it would go as far as to learn Fuinjutsu to fight him. Then again, the man must have known he couldn't win in a straight fight. Perhaps he should give the man and his brother some credit. They had brought him to this state. He couldn't even speak, and a second ago, his Rinnegan just disappeared. He was now left with his normal eyes. He was trapped in a corner. It gave him sudden chills as he waited with bated breath for the kind of final blow the Raikage would deliver upon his defenseless body. Surely, he couldn't do anything. He just had to take in the attack and hope that his body would regenerate quick enough. It took us 3 years to develop that seal, A said, with a confident grin. His background wasn't pleasant, but they finally got the man bundled down. An uncompleted version of it was used on you in Iwagakure weeks ago. So the man had been working with Onoki for a long time now. Naruto wasn't too surprised. The idea of this seal may have even come from that old fool. Onoki had been sharp despite his age. Still, for villages who aren't renowned for their fuinjutsu prowess, they did an excellent job here. Wenna looked at his brother for a moment, he wanted to frown. The brother of his had his back turned against the emperor, confident that the seal would hold. His eyes were looking at the massacre ground, as the emperor had called. Perhaps there were hundreds still alive. But without medical attention, they would die given their critical states. Their sacrifices would not be for nothing. He may not have foreseen things coming to this end, but he was at a good standing now. He could end the emperor. He was going to win. He would march back to Kumo as the victor. Victory was within his grasp. It was in front of him. A shouted. We need to finish things here. We don't know how long this will last. We only got one shot. We need to use it before the seal wears off. B nodded. He understood. They could all mourn the dead after their enemy was dead. If they took the head of the emperor or what would be left of him to the imperial capital, the war would be over. Those men's sacrifices wouldn't have been in vain. The brothers nodded towards each other before simultaneously going through similar hand seals. Once done, they slammed their hands on the ground, and a joint seal formed on the ground. In a puff of smoke, a wheeled weapon, with one huge cannon launcher appeared. A positioned it in front of the emperor, pressed a few buttons before he called B. Both placed their hands on a small screen for their handprints. The weapon activated and chakra began to gather at the mouth of the launcher. For the many you have slaughtered, we will end you now. According to our research, natural energy is your weakness. But in this state, it doesn't matter. You can't absorb anything. You're defenseless. Let's do this, brother, B said firmly. That man had taken his buddy away from him. He'd stripped him of his one true friend. It was unforgivable, and the murders here were not forgivable either. Burn in hell, your majesty. A shouted mockingly. The weapon fire a pale form of chakra that shot out in a stream, heading towards the emperor in blinding speeds. If a Susanu's sword could cut through a mountain, then this beam could separate a mountain. Even after hitting the emperor, the beam continued to march forward, reaching distances neither Raikage nor brother could follow. That should erase his entire existence, A said with a smile. B nodded in agreement. There was no way he could survive. No way in this world or the next. The emperor was as good as dead. I was sure of it. The beam died down without any explosion occurring, it just silently disappeared into thin air. A and his brother watched carefully, ready to act should there be a need. But in all calculations, no one should be able to survive that blast. It should turn the body into ash. Both brothers were shocked when smoke lingered where the emperor had been restrained. Their eyes widened further after the smoke cleared. Their emperor was still alive. Half of his upper body was missing from the left shoulder. A disturbed grin was on his bloody lips, which were leaking blood. How are you still alive? Naruto fell on one knee, breathing heavily. If I was normal, I'd be dead. That blast would have turned me into ash. But I told you, didn't I? You don't understand the powers you're against. Once more again, the brothers watched the emperor doing something that should be impossible. It took about a minute, but his missing parts regenerated. Still, he looked really pale, and his breathing had yet to calm. I could only assume that regenerating that much of his body required a lot of chakra, and that blast had taken a lot out of him. Oi, are you even human? The disbelief was conveyed in B's voice. Yes, Naruto said, still on his knees. He literally couldn't stand up, despite talking as if he was fine. None of his dujutsu could even activate due to the lack of power. I am just a bit abnormal, rather, for the lack of a better word. Gritted his teeth, his lightning cloak burst into life once more before he sped towards the emperor. His lightning-powered punch roared into the face of his opponent. Naruto couldn't dodge nor block the attack. The fist of the Raikage hit him hard on the gut. It had so much power that the emperor coughed up a mouthful of blood. Wasn't done. He gripped the emperor by his face, slamming him down the ground in a resounding fashion. You may have survived the blast, but you can't defend yourself. I will end you. Despite being pressed down the ground by A's right hand, Naruto managed a slight shake of his head. No. You're wrong about that. I am not defenseless. Before it could retort, he was slammed hard on the side by a clone of Naruto, carrying the truth-seeking balls. The clone had come out of nowhere. Did you not ask yourself why I didn't have those balls when I came here? Naruto asked, still lying down the ground. Well, that was something that neither B nor A had questioned. In fact, they hadn't thought much about the damn dangerous balls until now. A still spoke through gritted teeth. I figured you couldn't use them because of your weakened state, or you just felt that you didn't need them, he said, his mind trying to find ways to get out of the situation. Yes, that first wave of attack had left me incapable of fighting to my standards. I didn't have the amount of chakra I needed, Naruto said. And so, I sent this clone to Kumogakure. A widened his eyes. The fact that the clone had returned meant that it had succeeded in whatever that it had been sent to do. He growled. He had left Darui and Yugito to protect Kumo. What could have happened to them? What happened to his village? As if reading A's thoughts, Naruto spoke once more, while still lying on the ground, with his clone just beside him. Don't worry, I didn't kill Darui and Yugito, nor did I harm the village. Technically it was the clone which responded before Naruto took over. Well, they spoke simultaneously. However, I made it very clear to your village what you nearly did. That you nearly and wanted to destroy innocent people like what Onoki did. I informed them that I could not forgive that. Naturally they tried to ridicule me and call me things, but I merely asked them if I had ever tried to kill innocent people, and if I was as evil as they believed me to be, why was I not destroying them for what you did? I demonstrated to them that I could destroy them if I wanted to it. I made sure they believed it with their own eyes that I could. But because I was a fair person, I would not. What did you do? This time, it was the clone which shrugged and responded only, nothing serious. Like I said, the first wave had left me drained of chakra. The clone had another purpose in its visit to Kumo. 2 more purposes really. Destroy the weapon you used and collect chakra from your shinobi. To prove what he was saying, the clone disappeared in a puff of smoke, giving him all the chakra it had absorbed. Naruto's skin turned normal again. But it was still slightly pale. The emperor got up from the ground, his truth-seeking balls around me. My body is still weak. It's embarrassing really, he said to himself. These balls are the reason you haven't attacked, isn't it? I merely glared. You know what they can do, Naruto said. I will make things comfortable for you. He snapped his fingers and another clone appeared. It took the balls before disappearing. Before Naruto could say anything, the Raikage was already attacking him. Naruto just shook his head. Hasty man, he thought. Naruto didn't attempt to dodge the punch. His activated Sharingan could predict things quite well, and he simply caught the punch, not with his bare hand though, it was a mixture of wind and gravity. Once the punch was stopped, he allowed his hand to leave the fist. His Rinnegan showed up, replacing the Sharingan. Bansho Tenon, that said, the Raikage was pulled into the palm of his hand, and caught on the neck. Gakido, he muttered while restraining the man from moving using a force of gravity. I quickly realized what was going. The emperor was absorbing his chakra. He tried moving, but he was losing chakra far quickly than he could muster any energy to try and break free. Within a few seconds, his lightning cloak was dispersed as he no longer had the chakra to keep it alive. B. Retreat for now. A shouted at his brother. You can fight another day. While B was hesitant, Naruto wasn't. I told you no one was going to leave this place, he held out his left hand. Bansho Tenon. B flew into the left palm and was put in the same position as his older brother. Gakido, he fell into the same fate. Normally, I wouldn't resort to such means, but there is a city I must protect. The emperor said so while absorbing the chakra of the two. Kami-sama, he really needed it. He doubted he could even fight in the next battle without getting more chakra. Naruto threw it into the air, weakened as he was. He then slammed B down the ground in a brutal manner. As the Raikage fell down the ground, Naruto held out his right hand, and a chakra rod materialized. The Raikage fell down the ground, tried to stand after which, but couldn't stand, he barely had any chakra left. He only had energy to release a growl when Naruto pierced through his gut by the chakra rod. Both of you are going to die, and though I'm losing shinobi, my city still stands, Naruto said to A. Let us talk for a moment, shall we? The blow he'd just received was bleeding him. He was going to die. He had failed his mission. And the Emperor was going to enslave this world, his village. Cursed Uchiha. You must be thinking that you failed and I am going to rule over your village. Make your people suffer, Naruto said, earning a growl from the wreckage. The truth is, I have no such plan. I knew that without a war, I could never actually get you and Onoki killed without sparking an outcry. Since I was bored, I thought it was best we start a war. During this war, I can reduce the number of shinobi, and kill the cages who oppose me. You will meet your day, Uchiha, snarled, hatefully. That remains to be seen. Still, after this few battles, the world will be free, I will be free, Naruto smiled. Do you know why? The only glared, weakly. Kiri, Sunagakur, they are both in my hands, and will never turn on me. Kuretsuchi has come to understand, in due time, she will be my ally. The shinobi that resent me from Iwa will be dead by tomorrow night. Soon enough, Sasuke will take Konoha, and in due time, it will become an ally of the rice. I have Yugito in Kumo and Darui isn't like you. The thing is, my empire will hold other nations together. Even if Kumo chooses to hate, it will be nothing more than an insect because Konoha, Suna, and Kiri will be on my side. Iwagakure may not become a true friend, but it won't venture into fights with me. Be happy, your death will bring in a new world. Amaterasu. That said, the two brothers burst into flames. Just to make sure no one survived, Naruto did a Tengai Shinsei. Naruto looked up at the meteorite. The others were surely seeing this, and his city would feel its tremors. Now then, I better get out of here. I don't think I will survive if this thing hits me, Naruto said. As he took a step away, he suddenly fell on the ground. He smiled wryly. I need more chakra. Just outside of the capital when Naruto appeared outside the walls of the city in the north gate, he couldn't help but frown. There was a small army charging. It wasn't just that. What made him frown was that there were other platoons charging other sides of the capital. These people, they knew the city's defenses weren't at large. The army was small. The city was crowded by civilians. A fatal flaw in their plan is that they'd counted on him wasting too much time in the battlefield with the main assault group, which was A's company. On his previous battles, he had never been shy from the chance of taking time to enjoy the battle. But this time, he hadn't fought. Just activated weapons of mass destruction and killed everything. That was what he had to do here as well. Given his current chakra reserves, he would need to use the divine trees to take away chakra from these shinobi. That would help. He didn't want anyone surprising him with an attack while he was low on chakra and very worn out. He had already received 2 fatal hits. By all accounts he should be dead. If not from the first hit, then by the second hit. Even so, he was here, only due to his inability to die. Once more again, Naruto brought out the divine tree, and allowed it to do the dirty work for him, feed him with chakra. It was his to begin with, so no one should really complain. Natural energy was another way to recharge, but at his current state, Naruto chose not to. He didn't want to end up stuffing in too much energy he couldn't regulate within his body. Minutes later, throne room. The room was rather quiet now, and not so intimidating as it was the last time around. It was easy for Karen to breathe as she walked towards the emperor, who was back on his favorite pose. He hadn't taken too much time in his battles, but yet he was back here. The battles weren't over. People were still fighting outside the city. It was just that no one was going to get in without her knowing. Karen frowned when she looked at the emperor carefully. His skin seemed pale and the chakra she was sensing from him wasn't at its usual peak. Even if he had just left the battlefield, Karen couldn't actually believe that it could be so low. She swallowed hard when his sharp eyes fully took her form. Are you okay? You don't seem healthy, she managed to say to the emperor. Silence greeted her, but Naruto did respond. I'm fine, Naruto said. I guess this is what happens when you take on 2 death blows. My body was almost torn to pieces in the first wave. I had much difficulty in regenerating after that. The second drained much of my chakra that I couldn't keep my dujutsu activated without absorbing chakra. Karen nodded quietly. I guess they were prepared for this, she said before adding. But it shouldn't be a surprise since they has time. Yes, they were. If it wasn't for my control over the divine trees, I would most likely be immobilized in a battlefield while they think of ways to seal me away, Naruto said. I have never faced such embarrassment like this in my life. Yeah, so like Naruto to be worried about saving face at a time like this. Fireworks were occurring outside the city. People were dying, and he was talking about facing the embarrassment of his life. Yeah, definitely the emperor. I'm guessing in your state you won't be fighting anymore, Karen said, in the form of a statement. Yes, I will rest out here, for now, Naruto said. Given the surprise and strategy of the attack, we can believe that Konoha's wave of attacks won't come until tomorrow. From what I gathered, Konoha is under attack as well. So, they will first defend their village before coming here. We may still be fending off attacks by then if you don't participate, Karen said. I can live with that, Naruto merely said. Tomorrow's expected assaults should be much more challenging than today's. I hope by them, we will end things. Karen nodded, she wasn't going to question the emperor. At least while you're here, you can defend the city from other surprises, and I doubt the Hokage will be sending an army. Unlikely, but at this stage, I'm expecting anything, Naruto said. I can't locate Kotaro and now. Where are they? Karen was surprised by that, but she didn't question it. They are acting as backup to both Shinji and Haisuke, who are at the south and west gates, respectively. Send a word for both Shinji and Haisuke to return. Now and Kotaro can take charge of things. I will watch over the walls. What of the north gate? I sealed it, Naruto said, closing his eyes. Karen knew she was being dismissed, and so, she left the presence of the emperor, who was probably going to engage in self-recovery while keeping an eye on the walls of the city. He could perfectly do that while within that throne of his 4x. The sound of swords clashing, battle cries, all reached Haisuke as he danced around the battlefield, holding a line to stop these Iwa shinobi from reaching the capital. The battle was tough, especially when they were outnumbered. Difficult it was. But they were holding rather well. Their military power wasn't judged on numbers, but quality. That in mind, they would win this battle, and he was certain Shinji was doing far better than he was. Explosives, one of his men shouted in warming as a hail of explosive tags were sent to their position. Mud wall. Haisuke shouted to the man who could do the earth jutsu. Wind users repel the explosives as well. Fire users, be ready for assault once the mud wall crumbles down. Yes, sir. The men got ready to act. As the fireworks began, Haisuke held his blade firmly, his senses stretching in all directions. Just so he could avoid the damn enemies springing in and attack while they were blindsided. They'd lost enough of their men. A sensor shouted, enemy attack. Behind you, General. I got it. Continue with what you're doing. Haisuke shouted back, while twisting. Just then, a man burst forth from the ground. But he found Haisuke's blade waiting for him. The general didn't waste time, as he swiftly pierced through the shinobi's chest with his blade. To his horror, the man merely grinned and grabbed his blade rather firmly. He cursed when he realized the man was booby-trapped by a set of explosives around his body. Before he could let go of his blade to take cover, the explosives went off. Boom. Despite the explosion happening around them, the Imperial shinobi didn't look too much on it. They continued their focus on their assault. It would do them good to lose concentration like this. They didn't want to lose their hold. Not when the emperor had taken bodily harm while trying to save them so that they could fight. One took charge over Haisuke, the wall is down. Release the fire dragons, he shouted as about 50 shinobi went on to do the jutsu. Just away from the explosion that nearly killed him, Haisuke was on knee, breathing heavily with bruises all over his body. He looked at his right, now. I can still go on, you know. This is nothing, he said to his colleague. Now shrugged. Yes, you can. But His Majesty has called for your return. Have you forgotten that you have duties at the royal palace? I haven't forgotten, Haisuke said firmly. But Samui-sama insisted that I join the front lines. We had to do this. I know. Return now. You don't want to keep the emperor waiting. I will finish things here, now said, stepping away from Haisuke to join the battle. Haisuke didn't say a word in response, he merely disappeared from the battlefield. He appeared next in the throne room. The emperor was on his throne, a bruised Shinji on his knees. You were called as well, Haisuke said to Shinji. The man nodded. I was, he said. Your Majesty, Shinji said to the Emperor. I thought you'd be in the royal quarters, looking after your family. They are not here. I sent them to my core dimension. I fear they be at risk because there is a rat in one of the high-ranking officials in battle right now. I don't know which one it is, but one exists, the Emperor stated. We had suspected that as well, given recent actions, Shinji said. But why call us here? We could have been of use at the battlefield. Is there something we have to deal with? Hashirama asked. Naruto nodded. Special Corps HQ have to be evacuated, Nao's tower and the Citizen Affair complex as well. You have to evacuate them within an hour. Alarmed, Hashirama was quick to respond. What is happening, Heika? The attacks were coordinated and occurred one after the other, it was why it had made him mad. Outside the country's borders, the Iwa shinobi outside the city's wall. Shinji tensed, eyes widened slightly, you mean there could be an attack inside the city as well? Who could have done that without us knowing? Without you knowing. We have always kept our security airtight. No spy could have entered the city long enough to plan an attack. Hashirama nodded in agreement. But that is not important here. What is really happening, Your Majesty? A set of complex explosives were planted in those buildings, Naruto said. The rat that planted them was with you while you were still in your training. While this city was being extended, rebuilding taking place, he had all the time. I'd been too arrogant to think anyone in the city would betray me. If it is someone we trained with, then it is someone who knows us well and knows the system. For that person, it was to move about without anyone noticing, Hashirama frowned. He didn't like this. Who is it, Your Majesty? I have my suspects narrowed to shinobi, Naruto said. We will deal with that later. For now, you have your tasks. Karen will join as well. You already have less than an hour to disarm the explosives. While we talk, time is ticking. Both Shinji and Hashirama were on their feet in a second, their weariness a distant memory. Why do you say they are complex? Each explosive within a building is connected by a chakra thread. If you tear one out improperly, causing it to detonate, the others will detonate. We can't leave them because they are all set to detonate eventually. Karen will show you a simple seal to deactivate them. The final chapter. The limit and explosion rocked through the imperial capital with so much power that the city trembled slightly. The city came at a standstill as reality began to dawn within the hearts of the people within the protective walls of the city. They had been attacked once more. They knew there were battles occurring outside the walls, but they'd felt secure because nothing had penetrated the walls so far. Their shinobi were fighting with all their might to protect them. Things changed with the explosion. They started to panic. Even if the emperor was present in the capital, within his royal palace, the Special Corps HQ had been blown into smoke. Nothing had been left of it. That was much more damage, even though it was just a building that had been destroyed. The Special Corps was the elite force in the country. There was no better group than it, and its HQ had been destroyed. If there was any time to panic, it was now. If there was a good time to be afraid, it was now. Perhaps the emperor was no longer untouchable as he used to be. If he was untouchable, something like this wouldn't happen, would it? Not long ago, he had been badly injured. The emperor was not a demon, he was not a god as they'd come to think. He was just a human with more power. Eventually, now he has met his match and the city was panicking. Inside his royal palace, Naruto felt the explosion. It meant failure. It meant Hashirama and Shinji had failed. Perhaps they didn't have enough time to disable the explosions, or maybe the one responsible for the explosions set them off when he saw that they were being disabled. It was a possibility, nevertheless, it mattered little now. His city was in panic mode. Such a reality never seemed possible for his city. He'd always thought the people would always take comfort in his power and be calm at all times, like he was. He was wrong. They were panicking, thinking he was just a normal person who could be defeated. Humans. He couldn't fault them though. What their eyes were seeing led them to believe so. He wasn't worried. He may have had the belief that his subordinates would succeed, even though they'd failed, it didn't change too many things. Despite the fact that his city was overridden with fear, Naruto could still smile. Things were just going awry. He hadn't expected to be so far off. Naruto's Sharingan lit up in the room as he felt a presence within the throne room. With the darkness within, the Sharingan seemed to lit up in a menacing manner. But that didn't scare the intruder. Emperor, Nagato started, his Rinnegan glowing with as much power as the Emperor's left eye. Why are you sitting here while the city is at disarray, and with battles being fought outside the walls? What do you wish of me to doing at this time, Nagato? Fighting with your people. You shouldn't be sitting here watching the battles like it is some sort of a show. This is not the right behavior for an emperor, Nagato stated firmly. Why don't you go and that for me, Nagato? Perhaps I may put you as emperor in the next couple of years. Naruto offered lightly. It is not my place to do so, Nagato said. He raised his right hand, palm open. You're not worthy of being emperor. This world should have seen the face of peace years ago. But you have been doing nothing. You have preferred to just watch. I'm afraid I can no longer tolerate that. Nagato, this isn't Naruto trailed off when that damn swirl occurred beside the former leader of the Akatsuki. Obito. Naruto. Obito acknowledged before placing his right hand on Nagato's shoulder. Shinra Tensei. Boom. The roof of the palace was blasted off by the Shinra Tensei. The thing was noted by almost everyone. This did nothing to soothe the citizens' fears. Even the emperor's palace was no exempt to the destruction. Naruto had a deep frown on his face, while still sitting on his cracked throne. The walls around were cracked. A simple hit and they were going to crumble down the ground. It was disappointing. He hadn't thought another attack would be coming here at this time. He'd thought Obito would be busy protecting Konoha to come here, and Nagato would wait for the right moment to attack him. Now of all times. He was still recovering from his previous death blows. The emperor stood up from his throne, which crumbled down after which he didn't mind it. I raised both of you from the dead, Naruto said, walking straight towards the two, and I expect something better from you. He disappeared before he could reach them. What happens in Konoha? Naruto asked, looking above the sky as he stood still on a clear field. I'd thought you'd be busy fending off enemies to the village. Sasuke is weaving out the threat along with Guy and Lee. They should handle it without problems. They may be over with it already, Obito answered frankly, his tone still devoid of any emotion. Naruto guessed this should have been expected. But still, to think that another attack would be launched at this stage when he was in this state. It wasn't so bad that he couldn't take down both Nagato and Obito, but he wouldn't be able to fight after the battle. He would be vulnerable, and that was a feeling he didn't want to experience once more again. That time he experienced it when he was locked up in his sky palace was enough. It wasn't even the best of times, if there was ever any, to feel vulnerable. There was a war occurring. If he allowed one in, it would be over. No one may be able to kill him, but being vulnerable means he could be defeated. There was a clear difference between death and defeat. Between the two, Naruto feared the latter. The others left in Konoha could attack him while he was vulnerable. If he only counted Guy, with his gates open, his subordinates wouldn't be able to handle him. And so the emperor couldn't allow them to fight the man if he does show up. Still, at this stage, it was likely that he wouldn't make it here, unless there is a way to replenish his energy. He was busy fighting now. That meant he was exerting his energy reserves, which was good for him. Are you worried about another wave of attacking coming at you? Obito asked. In your current state, even if you were to survive, you wouldn't be a winner at the end of the day if another wave of attacks from shinobi capable as we are is thrown into the fray. Naruto raised a brow, head tilted to the side for a moment as he digested those words from Obito. He smiled after they'd settled down. Did I leave myself that open for you to read? He shook his head. It doesn't matter anyway. Let us get this over with so that I can return to my home. Its current state displeases me. Nagato narrowed his eyes. He never had any doubt that the man did care about his country, to a certain level. He may hide it well, but Nagato knew. So those words didn't surprise him. What surprised him was the fact that the man was willing to them out loud for anyone to hear. Oh well, it didn't matter much anyway. This was something that had to be done for peace. For so long he has yearned for peace to be within his reach, but he had come to understand that so long as the emperor remained active there would be no peace. If the emperor was doing something for peace, then Nagato would be in his corner. He wasn't doing anything. He merely stood there watching everything as if it was all a good show for him. Nagato couldn't allow that to continue. He wanted peace and would fight for it. He was willing to remove everything and anything that was an obstacle to the dream he wishes to grasp within his hands. If the removing couldn't work, then the emperor had to be forced into action. Given the man's power, this was the likely action and Nagato was still willing to die in order to force the emperor's hand. In the blink of an eye, both Nagato and Obito disappeared. There was no silence in their disappearance, there was a sound of a battle cry. Both appeared in front of the emperor, above ground. Nagato's right foot was floating towards Naruto's raised hands, while Obito stayed behind the former leader of Akatsuki, touching his right shoulder. The kick didn't connect with Naruto's hands, it simply phased through his body. A second later, Obito flashed behind the emperor, still in midair. He swung his right hand towards the back of the emperor, and a chakra rod formed. He drove the rod at blinding speeds, trying to pierce Naruto on the back. On instinct, Naruto flanked his left hand, twisting backwards, before grabbing the rod. Before he could snap it, the rod flickered with a shot of lightning that coursed through his body. Whether he felt the shock or not, it was left for the imagination to figure out as Naruto made no physical reaction to it. Naruto was quick to snap his eyes back at Nagato who was just inches away from him, right hand held out. The next two words that came were predictable. Shinra Tensai. Naruto was blasted backwards by the jutsu. It did no harm but Nagato hadn't thrown it to do any damage. Kaiten. Great Fireball no Jutsu. Both Nagato and Obito yelled simultaneously. The fireballs rushed at the emperor in menacing heat, giving him time to make an escape. Shinra Tensai. The moment he released the jutsu, Obito appeared in front of him, having made himself intangible to avoid the blast, and was able to just smoothly get closer to the emperor. Acting quickly, Obito launched a powerful right punch at the emperor's gut, with a momentum that sent him to the air. He didn't go far, as Nagato quickly flashed above Obito with a spinning kick that connected with Naruto's forehead. The kick sent Naruto backwards in blinding speeds. He was quick to regain his balance though, as he flipped several times before hitting the ground with his feet whilst sliding back. Naruto's attention was forced up as a giant boulder shadowed him. The thing was coming down at him to crush him. In response, he raised his right hand. But he didn't do anything as he noted Nagato speeding towards another position while Obito charged straight at him. He could foresee an attack that would follow if he chose to blast the boulder with a Shinra Tensai. While his right hand was still up in the air, Naruto held out his left. A burst of roots came forth around him, rushing up into the air. They pierced through the boulder, breaking it into chunks that fell harmlessly down the ground. Kuchio's no Jutsu. Nagato yelled as a path came forth. The path quickly formed a missile launcher and a second later, it fired 5 missiles aimed at the emperor. The missiles reached the target in a moment of seconds, before setting off into a huge explosion after connecting with the roots that were protecting Naruto. As the explosion cleared, all the roots were no longer to be seen, having been burned off. Naruto was standing still, hands formed in a crossing position, hiding his face. Burn smoke was coming off his entire body, and a few marks were visible on both his hands. Naruto looked up as he sensed something coming. Obito's perfect Susanoo was activated. It must have been activated whilst he was being hit by those missiles. The Susanoo's blade was sweeping through the ground insanely, picking up gusts of winds before slamming into him. The force sent him rocketing a distance away through the air. A distance away, Naruto crashed down the ground. As he attempted to stand on his feet, bruised and bleeding as he was, both Nagato and Obito crashed just in front of him. Nagato threw a stack of paper bombs right at him. Before the bombs could explode, Naruto did a Shinra Tensai to blast the papers away from him, knowing that it wouldn't have done him any favors if he got hit. The blast of the Shinra Tensai he released was so powerful that it tore through the battleground, lifting up large chunks of debris and left him kneel down a crater. Yet again, Obito just teleported in front of him, along with Nagato. The two didn't waste time before attacking. Nagato went in for a lifting kick that caught the emperor on the chin. This caused some blood to splash out of the emperor's mouth. Obito jumped up, catching Naruto by his felt foot. He then proceeded to slam him down the ground with so much force that there was a resounding boom when Naruto's body hit the unforgiving ground. To stop further attacks, Naruto activated his Susanoo. This caused his opponents to step back slightly. While lying on the ground, Naruto held out his right hand, frowning. Obito stated out why he was frowning. You're immortal, but that doesn't mean that you don't tire. No matter how powerful you are, the body will still need the time to replenish its strength and recover from its injuries. You received 2 death blows, although you reclaimed your chakra, your body is tired. With a tired body, you can't fight. We attacked now precisely because of this. Naruto ignored those words, and attempted to step up. He did so. But man did it hurt. Receiving a hit from a Susanoo blade wasn't a healthy thing, especially when it packed enough power to cut through a mountain. In his current state, it was just a knockout punch. Yet, Naruto forced himself. He summoned his chakra, and activated his perfect Susanoo. But it didn't last for a second before crumbling down and Naruto was forced to his knees. Nagato shook his head. It seems you don't know your own limits. I must thank the Raikage though. His death may have seemed pathetic, but because of him, we are within victory. No, victory is within our hands. Obito nodded, we may not be able to kill you, but we can still do the next best thing. To think such a day would come. Curse that bloody Raikage. But it was still good. A part of him felt jolts of excitement at feeling this weak. Naruto smiled a somewhat mad smile. So this is what it feels like to be at your limit. He picked himself up, his expression turning serious. I find myself curious. I understand why Nagato would do this, but why you, Obito? You gave me a chance to correct my wrongs. I don't think I have, but I have come to see the world on a new sight. I have asked myself, why don't you do anything for peace? Your grandfather sought for it, Nagato sought for, but you rejected their ways as wrong. If you know that their ways are wrong, surely you know what is right. You want to live with your family peacefully, but you know it's impossible with half of the elemental nations after your head. Even so, you have done nothing for peace. Do you know why? Obito paused for a moment. It is because you're afraid. You're afraid of failing. This is why you sent those people to try to bring the world together. You're afraid that if you fail, you may end up like your grandfather. Both Kakashi and Sasuke have said you're not generally a bad person. I have come to believe that as well. Naruto tilted his head to the side. His smile widened a bit before he laughed. It was an empty laugh. You think so? Well, no matter. Let us get this final dance over with. You don't get it. Do you? Your body can't fight anymore, Obito said strongly, slowly walking towards the emperor. A chakra rod formed on the palm of his hand before he flashed in front of Naruto. He tried to stab Naruto on the chest with it, but Naruto caught it with his right. It managed to pierce through the palm of his hand, drawing out blood. I never said anything about fighting with this body. I made this body for you. Nagato is fighting with my eye. Obito narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? He trailed off when there was a sudden buzz of static. It came out of nowhere. When Obito looked down, he saw a marked blade sticking out of his chest. Obito narrowed his eyes behind. How did you get behind me? You two are not the only ones who can teleport, Sasuke stated, behind Obito. Besides, I have been watching your back for 3 years now, don't you think I know when you're open? I didn't expect you to be here so quickly, Obito said, trying to get away, but couldn't. I finished things quickly, he said with a shrug before his hand became encased with lightning. Chidori. He drove the jutsu right through Obito's chest and allowed him to fall down the ground. What are you doing, Sasuke? Nagato yelled, rushing towards the Uchiha. Amaterasu. Sasuke lit up the former god of peace with the black flames. It was done so quickly that even Naruto's tired eyes didn't see it. Nagato blasted the flames away from him with a quick Shinra Tensai. He was forced to stop, as multiple chakra rods burst through his entire upper body, glowing with orange chakra. He couldn't move. Naruto cut the distance between them before gauging out his eye from Nagato's eye socket. He sent it away after which, and looked at Nagato for a moment before turning his attention towards Sasuke. He was frowning. I just saved your life. You owe me, Sasuke said before disappearing. Throne room. Naruto sat down on a makeshift throne within the partly destroyed throne room. His emperor pose in place and a frown on his face with the Sharingan activated. He wasn't staring at anything in particular, just the empty space ahead of him. There were so much thoughts going through his mind for him focus on anything. It was bitterly amusing for Sasuke to have actually come to a position where he could rightfully say he had saved him. It was not his life that was saved, because those two couldn't have killed him, but it was from defeat that he had been saved. He walked into a battlefield, and walked out of it alive, and kicking. Something felt wrong in the situation though. It wasn't pretty that his people had seen him in this state when he returned from that battlefield. They'd seen him returning alive from a battlefield, wounded and bleeding, like any man. Perhaps this would reduce his fearsome reputation as a god. It was obvious that it would be hard for anyone to see him as the almighty emperor who couldn't be matched in power after everything that they'd seen. In all his accounts, he never thought that things would end up to this point. He had a much better vision for this short war. This has done nothing but put holes on his reputation. Well, at least he was still alive and the enemies were dead. Even in his state, Naruto snapped his eyes to the left side where now appeared. The man didn't say a single thing as he threw an object straight at him. It missed by an inch. Kotaro flashed to end direction of the object before catching it. Once done, he pierced it through the ground. A second later, both pulled something from the ground and Naruto suddenly found his upper body bound by a marked silver chain. The two pinned the chain down the floor using the blades, and rushed at the emperor, each holding their swords. Their objective was clearly to cleave off the emperor's head off his shoulders. Instead of cutting the emperor, there was a clash of metal around the man. Hashirama and Shinji had arrived, along with Karen, who was standing a safe distance away. Why, now? Hashirama demanded. Tisk, now growled. They'd been duped into thinking these two were still busy fighting elsewhere. How could they have not noticed it? Well, it mattered not anyway. We all have a set of principles and ideals, Hashirama. An understanding of the other is only possible when you're willing to listen and adapt to other people's beliefs. The problem comes when you believe only you are right and try to force this right over other people. It isn't to say that the emperor forces his beliefs over other people. He simply does nothing, and that is the problem. His lack of action and a sense of responsibility is what brought this city to this state. It is what brought the elemental nations to harbor hatred. This war came because he did nothing good, even when he knows really well what good is. We cannot. That is enough. Shinji silenced the man. He snapped his left fingers, and the special corps surrounded the place within a second. You have betrayed the empire, and you will not be forgiven. This is treason. We came prepared. A scenario like this was likely to occur, Kotaro said. There was a boom around the royal palace after those words left his mouth, and in the midst of those tremors, and falling walls of the palace, he disappeared along with now. Damn it. They disappeared. I can't track them down, Karen said. But I should be able outside of this place. Something is interfering with my senses. Let them be. For now. Naruto's voice silenced everyone. There are more important matters to deal with. Hashirama turned to face the pale-looking emperor. The chain. Don't touch it, Naruto merely said, but didn't offer any explanation as to why. Shinji, restore calm within the capital. Hashirama, take a few of your men and try to calculate the damage the country has taken. And Karen, go to the Crystal Palace and get working on rebuilding. Now. Before anyone could respond, Sasuke made another announced appearance. One look at the emperor and he shook his head, showing some disappointment. It was all a play, of course. I just spared your life moments ago and you were already going to lose it again. How careless of you. Bastard. Do not speak of such nonsense. Don't even make me laugh, you save His Majesty's life. Get out of here. It was Sasuke who laughed, a mad laughter that made a few stomachs twist. But I did spare his life when we were fighting against him 2-on-2. Nagato was on his corner. Obito and I beat them. Of course, knowing him, he refused to accept defeat and ended up getting Obito, but I survived. I would have killed him if I wanted. You two must know, he said looking straight at Hashirama and Shinji, he wasn't in any position to fight after what I had done to him. If I'm lying, he can say so himself. All eyes turned towards the emperor, who had a flat look on his face. Sasuke. Leave. Now. That said, Naruto closed his eyes. The rest of you get to your duties. I wish to rest for a little while. Unconsciousness gripped him a second later, with the chain still binding his upper body. Sasuke left with a wide grin. Mission accomplished. This was his show now to run. He had said the same story in Konoha. Whether the leaders believed it or not was hardly a consequence. What mattered most was what the villagers thought, and they believed. Soon enough, they would stop hating the emperor and hail him as the hero who defeated a god. It was possible they would even add that Naruto had begged pathetically to be spared, and out of the goodness of his heart, Uchiha Sasuke had spared the emperor because he had pitied him. The rumor would spread across the elemental nations. Naruto wasn't going to comment on it. He would neither deny nor accept it. He wasn't about to admit that Sasuke had saved him. Besides, this lie ensured that Omegakure and the Imperial Kingdom remained allies. And for once, Naruto would be seen as a human. In due time, people would stop fearing Naruto's power. Things would settle down soon enough, and Hiro will eventually take his place as Konoha's Hokage. A week later, you really have to look like an emperor, Naruto, Samui said, carefully putting the pieces back together in Naruto's cloak. The cloak was the normal one he used to wear, but added with a few pieces of red clothing. You're no longer going to spend these next couple of years hiding in the throne room. You now have an image as leader of the Imperial Kingdom. My image was destroyed when the rumors started to reach all corners. It's unbelievable that people would be so much willing to believe that I would actually get on my knees and beg for mercy in the hands of Uchiha pathetic Sasuke, Naruto said. It has been just a week, but the rumor had already reached all corners, and his then fearsome reputation had been drenched down into a cold puddle of shame. The power that once shadowed his name had disappeared with a stupid war, and all that was left of him was just a name in the empire. At least no one was going as far as to attack his home. The attacks had ceased. People were taking joy into the fact that Sasuke had defeated him. If he could do it once, he could do it again. The fact that he did nothing to refute the rumors did him no favors. But Naruto didn't have too many complaints. He was willing to walk without shame. Besides, only fools would believe that he actually begged to be spared by Sasuke. That an unbelievable as it is, people are willing to believe anything that will help them sleep better at night, Samui said with a slight shrug of her shoulders. You're going to represent us. It is better to look like a leader, and you need to ensure stability before you go away. Stability will only become a reality when you start doing your part. I've never been a fan of formalities, Naruto said with a sigh. But this has to be done, is it not? Yes, even if it means you have to swallow your pride, Samui said firmly. We need to create better terms with other nations for Etsuko's sake. Sasuke's lie may have shattered your pride and image, but this has given us an opportunity to start things afresh. It has, Naruto acknowledged. This is the reason I'm not too displeased with him. If news had gotten out that Nagato had betrayed the empire, and if things had continued as they had, I would have been forced to further my stay in this world or even enslave it to create a better world for Etsuko. Samui blinked. He was being completely serious. It was to be expected of him. She really shouldn't be surprised to hear him say something like that. Well, all the better things are in this way, she said, managing a smile. On the bright side of things, you are still emperor to your people. It's not as if someone would have been foolish enough to challenge me for the throne. They may have seen me battered up, but a part of them has to believe that I am a warrior, and just because I was defeated by Sasuke doesn't mean I have become weak. Some people may not believe so, Samui was quick to say. Let us just thank that first wave of attack. Because of it, the people know you care for them and they have learned to care for their king. That is important, isn't it? It is, Samui affirmed with a nod. A strong bond will only be created now. Between you and your people. You took a hit for them and they will now be willing to do the same because they now believe that their king is human as they are. There was a knock on the door. Must you always knock as if you're a guest? Naruto asked, looking at Yugao, who'd helped herself into the room. Everyone deserves privacy, Yugao said. That was something she agreed with Samui. Shinji is waiting for you. He says the guests are arriving. Naruto nodded and summoned his shakuho. He left the room, leaving Yugao with Samui. Shinji was waiting for him just outside of his quarters. Shall we? Shinji nodded, leading the emperor towards the Crystal Palace, which hadn't been touched during the attacks in the capital. The royal palace had suffered some extensive damage and was currently being rebuilt. Some facilities were still usable nonetheless. Naruto was a bit surprised when he entered a former war room within the Crystal Palace. The surprise was in what he saw in the room. I wasn't expecting you to be the first person to be here of all people, Naruto said, walking towards his seat. I had more time, Kuretsuchi said with a shrug. You look happy, she commented, seeing a little difference in him since the last time she saw him. I thought you'd be pretty pissed with the rumors flying around. Naruto waved his right hand dismissively. I have no reason to be angry, he said. Kuretsuchi nodded. Her eyes narrowed. I actually came here before the others arrived because I have something to say to you. Come on with it then, Naruto said, folding his hands across his chest. It was okay to talk. The guards were stationed outside the room, they were not allowed inside. I don't believe the nonsense that you begged for mercy. I believe it is just a rumor. And Sasuke spared you're alive. It is hard to believe. You're not the type to be spared and given your power. I don't see a situation like that ever arising, the Tsuchikage said strongly. So what is the true story? You really want to know? Yes. I don't want to end up living in lies. I did not beg for mercy and Sasuke didn't spare my life. I was indeed involved in a fight with Nagato and Obito. I was at a disadvantage and Sasuke came in just in time to stop the battle. He said something about saving my life. Kuretsuchi stared at Naruto for a couple of seconds before bursting out in laughter. Ha 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 ha. Naruto just stared at the black-haired woman. Someone saved you from defeat. I can understand why you aren't saying anything about it. How would you defend yourself? The woman paused for a moment, thinking. He didn't spare me nor did I beg for mercy. The truth is, he saved my life from death. Once more again, the Yondaime Tsuchikage burst into laughter, just trying to imagine the prideful emperor saying something like that. It was hilarious. She had seen his power in Iwagakure when he waged his attack. That had to be a knockout punch to the man's pride. Well, will you look at that? Isn't this pretty? Mei's voice tore through the room. The emperor and the Tsuchikage getting along. Tell me, Tsuchikage Dono, what has the emperor been telling you for you to laugh so hard? Kuretsuchi regained her composure and waved her hand in a dismissive manner. That is between me and the emperor, she said nonchalantly, folding her hands beneath her bust. Is that so? Mei said. But no one responded to it. Hello, Mei, Naruto greeted the Godime Mizukage with a small smile. Emperor, Mei merely said and looked the other side. Kuretsuchi sensed some tension but shrugged it off. Your palace must have received some damage for you to house us here. The last time I came here you were sitting on your favorite seat. It did. The throne room was destroyed along with other parts. It is currently being rebuilt, Naruto said. Do you recall you were willing to offer yourself on that last visit? It had been amusing, and embarrassing for your part, huh? Don't remind me, Kuretsuchi said a bit bitterly. You made me feel like a cheap prostitute. Ah, I do regret that, Naruto said. Perhaps I should have taken up on your offer. Kuretsuchi snorted in disgust. She shivered when she thought of how things would have been like if he had taken up on her offer. The thought was horrifying. It made her crush all her thoughts and settle in silence. Mei looked at the pair of Naruto and Kuretsuchi. It was amazing how things could change in little time. A few months ago, the Yondaime Tsuchikage couldn't stand her husband. Hell, she was more than willing to slit his throat while the whole shinobi world watched. The woman detested Naruto more than anything. She couldn't stand him. Yet now she was laughing before his very presence. It wasn't that Naruto was making jokes while poking the sides of her chest, the woman was definitely laughing at the emperor. It was still something nonetheless. There were no tensions between them. Well, with Naruto, the tension was always one-sided. This was a good change. Perhaps it would symbolize what the shinobi world will become like in the next couple of years. Surely, some people are only willing to tolerate the other, but if things were to change like they have with Naruto and Kuretsuchi, then the world had a brighter tomorrow and Mei felt warmed up by that thought. Peace could be within reach if things changed like that. Mei's thoughts were cut when the other cages walked into the room. She guessed it was understandable for both Gaara and Kakashi to arrive at the same time. The railway both used was connected and they may have used the same train coming into the capital city of the Rice Empire. Darui was the last to arrive. Kakashi never thought this day would come. The cages gathering in the house of the emperor, ready to discuss peace treaties. If someone had told him a couple of years ago, he would have laughed. It was unthinkable. Especially when everyone came here voluntarily. He would have believed it would happen if the emperor was forcing everyone to come, but by choice. No. Yet it was happening and Naruto was as calm as ever. War does change people, but Kakashi didn't think Naruto could be changed by that. Still, the Hokage had to thank Sasuke for his scheming. Obito had informed him that Sasuke would most likely betray him in favor of the emperor. He could have talked Sasuke out of it, but Obito had insisted it was the best way someone like him could die. Obito had sacrificed himself, and things had worked for the better. He wasn't too angry with Sasuke because of it. If it weren't because of the Uchiha, they wouldn't be here freely. Naruto would have forced them to come here. Shall we start? Gaara asked, earning nods from the others. I'm happy that you all managed to make it here today. This is an important meeting that will determine the state of the elemental nations in the next couple of years. It is important, as we discuss, that we understand that we are not here representing our petty feelings, but we are representing our villages. We all want what is best for our people. There were nods around the table. We don't have to add on the objective of the meeting because you all know why we are here, and granted the current situation, we all want to return to our homes, Gaara continued. Who made you chair of this meeting? Darui asked. No one, Gaara said. I appointed myself. Do you have a problem with it, Raikage Dono? He nodded. I don't want to make things difficult but. Just to be fair, I believe a better person to lead this meeting would be someone who doesn't dine at the Emperor's palace, he said, politely as he could. That seems fair enough, Mei said with a nod. Who do you have in mind? The Tsuchikage or the Hokage? I'm not suitable for it, Darui said. Besides, it would be too much of a task for him. He just wanted to get this over with and return to Kumogakure. Kakashi was quick to rule himself out of consideration. I would rather the Tsuchikage chair the meeting, he said. He just didn't want to be put in a tricky position when the questions do come or when insults do come, if do come at all. In these kinds of meetings, it was best to stay neutral as possible. It was exactly how Naruto was dealing with things. Given his silence, Kakashi assumed the man was just going to be like that until the meeting was over. He would only speak when he was requested. Talk about keeping a low profile. Does anyone have a problem with the Yondaime Tsuchikage leading the meeting? Mei asked. No one had a problem with Kuretsuchi. Tsuchikage Dono, the reins are yours. Mei said politely. Thank you, Kuretsuchi said with a cough. Kumogakure is the only village that lost its cage during the short war, and this place was the only place to receive damage. Although Konoha was attacked, it managed to fend off the attacks. We are here because we don't want any more conflicts. The peace treaties are just a step to that. Before we start outlining the terms of the treaty, is there anyone who has something to say? Darui raised his hand, and Kuretsuchi allowed for him to speak his mind. The newly appointed Raikage looked straight at the silent emperor. I do not wish to play the blame game with you. I know that even if you hadn't said those things during the cage meeting, I would have still waged war on your country. But the one thing that has always made people fear is the Empire's power. Why don't we trim that power a bit to lessen the people's worries? It wasn't Naruto who responded to that, it was Mei who did so. What do you mean by that? More precisely, what do you wish? The rice is already powerful on its own. Having a Megakure as part of it further increases its power. Let us not forget that it also has Kiri in its corner. Uzu may be a research land, but more people are going there and it will eventually become another village part of the empire. Darui paused for a moment to let the words sink in before he spoke his request. The empire should free a Megakure. I believe it is only right it does so. A Megakure has always been a village on its own. It has its history. All eyes turned to the emperor, who responded with a simple word. Fine. Huh. It was Darui who said so. He found the answer to be baffling. He didn't expect Naruto to respond in that fashion. Hell, even Mei was surprised by his response. She didn't expect him to relent so quickly without a fight. A Megakure will be freed from the Empire's clutches, that was all Naruto said. Gaara shook his head. Naruto knew beforehand that this going to come. It didn't matter to him because he had no say in how a Megakure was run. It may be part of the Empire, but he didn't run it nor did Konan consult him with any decision she took. She did as she saw fit. Even if AIM does become independent, nothing would really change in the relationship between Konan and Naruto. Anyone thinking the Emperor was bowing to pressure was a fool. Gaara shook his head. Things would go his way at this point. No wonder he was keeping his mouth shut. Oh okay. That is cleared up. Kuretsuchi quickly cleared up her stuttering. The Yondaime Tsuchikage really wished she could figure out what went inside the Emperor's head. Prior to the short war, he had a streak of predictability about him, but now that seemed to be out of the window. It has to be something if even the likes of Gaara and Mei were surprised by his response. The surprise aside, this was a good thing. Kuretsuchi was not ignorant. She knew how things were run in a megachur. It was nevertheless good because Naruto had agreed to it. He could have said no simply because he had been requested to let the village out of his grasp. Now, the no would have been a response that wouldn't have surprised anyone. Is there anyone with anything else? They all shook their heads and they begun to discuss the terms of the treaty. The talks were as normal and civil as they could be. Naruto remained quiet, speaking when he was asked to say something. The cages bickered there and then, but things went smoothly without anyone threatening the other with death. Why aren't you saying a word, Emperor? Darui asked, looking at the man with a raised eyebrow. Is this not worth your effort? From what I understand, you have always had strong opinions about important matters. My quietness has nothing to do with the gravity of the situation we are dealing with here. I just think that it is important that for once I sit down and listen. I have had much of a say in the things of the past, wouldn't you say it is fair that I allow you to draw up the terms? If I disagree with something, I will say so. If not, I will abide to everything, Naruto said in flat tone. That is understandable, but this is something that we should all participate in, Darui said strongly. Fine then, Naruto relented. I just have a question. Non-aggression or so peace treaties have been signed in the past, but they have been nothing but just pieces of paper that were thrown away once the villages recovered from their losses. What will make things different this time? Kuretsuchi frowned. This was a question that she had failed to answer. Iwagakure had done this before. Her grandfather had just signed the treaties just to put an end to things temporarily. What would make things different now? It will be difficult for any village to destroy the treaty now, Kakashi said. Sunagakure, Rice, and Kurigakure share a bond that will not be destroyed anytime soon. The emperor's marriage to the Mizukage has ensured the relationship between Rice and Kiri stays strong. Gaara is not the kind to betray anyone. What of Kumo and Iwagakure? Naruto threw in once more. You have to remember that the elemental nations isn't comprised of us only, but there are smaller villages. The issue of small villages is another matter altogether, Gaara said. If you ask this question, you must have a solution on how we can deal with it. Naruto nodded. The Akatsuki, as small as, it had enough power to destroy a village. How about we create an elite force of shinobi with just enough power to oversee this treaty? This military force will be a watchdog that investigates and ensures that no village breaches the agreement. If a village does breach the agreement, it will enforce the punishment. I will only agree to it if the personnel is chosen from each of our villages, and it is controlled by this sitting, not a single person, Darui said. I can agree to that, Kuretsuchi said. Creating this military will require time. Gaara pointed out. We have all the time. As we rebuild, we can get this done, select the elite and perhaps get to know each other well, Mei said with a smile. She had no problems with Gaara and the Emperor, but as Kages, Kakashi, Darui and Kuretsuchi were new to her. It would be good for a better tomorrow for them to get to know each other. Understanding of the other heart would not come if they did know where the other's heart lies. Mei could feel that things would work for the better though. Kakashi didn't seem to have problems with Naruto. She could understand why, and Darui seemed like a fair and understanding person. It could be why he was elected as Raikage. If a had been here, he would have been making things difficult. Just imagine the Tsuchikage as well. How better the world would shape up to be without those war-hardened cages. I'm not hopeful on that idea, Kuretsuchi said honestly. Really, she had no interest in becoming good friends with any of them. She just wanted to maintain an acceptable relationship with them. Her focus was Iwagakure. But I will not stand in the way. What if this military force betrays us? Feeling all-powerful starts to cause trouble? Darui asked. Your cages, you crush it. That was Naruto's simple answer. Simple as it was, it made sense and didn't need any explanation. The cages just nodded to it. Further discussions were held. As usual, a few arguments did arise, but nothing too serious. Naruto assumed it was the human nature to disagree with the other. They were all unique and had different ideals and principles. Everyone had a picture of what was right and wrong. It was those differences that made them human and brought about the violence that has gripped the shinobi world. Ideals couldn't always be the same. Everyone would have his or her own take, and it took understanding to accept someone's ideals. You couldn't be right all the time, and if you can't acknowledge that, you're going to fight with others. Humility was a character that was needed in each of these cages had it, to a certain level at least. Once proceedings were completed, Kuretsuchi called an end to the meeting and a date for the next meeting was scheduled. Emperor Naruto, Darui called out as Naruto was walking within the passages of the Crystal Palace, on his own. He stopped and slightly turned to face the Raikage, who was being accompanied by Yugito. After greeting Yugito, Naruto turned his attention to Darui. He had his visible eye closed as he did so. What can I do for you? I have known Samui for a long time. She is a friend to me. To Yugito she is like a sister, Darui started. I would really like to see her before I leave. It would mean a lot to both of us if we do. Naruto opened his eye. I see, he said, and started walking away from the two. Follow me. Naruto's quarters Yugao afforded a smile seeing holding his daughter, already off his royal clothes, and left with just a black long-sleeved shirt and dark blue pants. As he sometimes does, his feet were wrapped up in white bandages. He surely walked like that even outdoors. It was no matter for him because his feet didn't normally touch the ground when he was walking outside. When Naruto was in the presence of his daughter, he was something else. It was a sight to watch. Not to say that he didn't look harmful. It was far from that. Yugao had seen him in more than one occasion, looking like he was open, but a single movement and his eyes would be all over the room. You can feel that he is watching. Even a would-be assassin would return home without the mission attempted. Naruto wasn't the one you could sneak upon. Sometimes Yugao thought he had eyes in the back of his head. If things had gone different, you'd be carrying our child, Yugao said, looking thoughtful. She wished things had been different. She wished both her and Naruto had made different choices back then perhaps things would have turned out better. Well, this was the reality of things, and she couldn't run away from it. What had happened, occurred. She couldn't change any of that. Naruto simply looked at the woman before him, but said nothing. Yugao sighed. How did things go at the meeting? Good, Naruto said. No one threatened to cut my head off, and no one made any outrageous demands. Yugao smiled. That is at least some good news, she said. It was expected nevertheless. Naruto nodded. The current cages are good people. They are a lot more understanding than the previous cages. It isn't because of that, Yugao said before adding. You have lived with Kakashi and he knows you. No matter what, he can't hate you. He will always try to find the reasons for your actions just so he can understand why you did and do certain things. Both Gaara and Mei share a similar principle when it concerns you. I guess both are kind-hearted people who understand. They have dealt with you in different situations to know that you mean well, and wish no harm. The shinobi world's perception of you isn't theirs. You have probably dipped your fangs on Kuretsuchi, that is why she has come around. I can't say much about Darui. You have analyzed the situation very well, Naruto said. Even if Darui had other plans, he wouldn't do much because I already have influence over the other cages. I could have done more with Kuretsuchi. Well, no matter. What is present is tolerable. Don't speak like that, Naruto, or I'm going to think this was your plan all along, Yugao said. You knew Sasuke was going to interfere with the battle. The How just eluded you. Sasuke wants two things. Konoha and the restoration of the Uchiha clan. He needs your support in both, and doing things as he did gives him a better image. It could have worked better with you dead. He would be hailed all over. Not precisely. Me being dead wouldn't make things better in this world. As it stands, I'm the lynch that holds this world together. Sasuke couldn't replace me with death. Defeating me to live another day will do, and he still needs me for the Uchiha rebirth. Naruto explained. I'm going to talk to Mei. Finally, Yugao said. I have told you many times to talk to her. I believe Samui has urged you to do the right thing as well. If you don't fix things now, you will never fix them. Naruto stared into sky blue eyes of the little girl he held. Such innocence. It was refreshing. How he wished the shinobi world was as innocent as those eyes. There was no way to return the lost innocence. The trick was fooling the mind, and only Genjutsu could do so. He wasn't a fan of Genjutsu, and so he would just wait and see how things would grow. There have been other things before me that I wished to rectify, Naruto said with a slight shrug of his shoulders. Besides, now is the best time to try to work things out. We have settled down and can enjoy the remainder of our lives together. Yugao frowned at that thought. How long? That is another matter for another time, Naruto said. He didn't wait to continue his conversation with Yugao. He left the room and walked towards the room Samui was hosting her guests. Once he got there, he handed her the baby and whispered a few words to her. Is she home already? Samui asked with a raised brow. No, Naruto said with a shake of his head. Still on board a train, I imagine. He disappeared from view after those words left his lips. Seeing that Naruto was gone, Darui coughed up a bit. Yugito was fondling over the baby and he wanted to get to his business. Samui, I have a request for you. What? Come back home. A few minutes later, well, this is a lovely surprise. Those were the words that greeted Naruto when he flashed into the compartment that housed Mei. He looked the red-haired woman. Her expression was blank, by her side was the cage. Naruto made himself comfortable alongside the two. I thought you'd be heading home, he said, looking to know one in particular, but he was obviously talking to the Godime Mizukage. You thought? Mei said, but I have some matters I have to be handle with Gaara. At this flow of time, he is about the only friend I have and I want to make the best of our friendship before anything happens. I see. Naruto's eyes turned to Mei, who was sitting on his right. It was only for a moment, but not subtle enough for either Mei or Gaara to miss it. Gaara. Naruto. Gaara acknowledged the other man. It seems that we're heading towards the right direction. For so long I have wished for us to take this step. At this stage, it seems as if peace will be within our reach. If you had walked on your own or taken Nagato's path, you could have reached a point as this some time ago, Naruto said. Gaara shook his head. He already knew that Nagato had chosen to fight the emperor in order to achieve his own peace. The information was kept a secret and only a few people knew about it. Those who did, had sworn to die with it. If such information does come out, it would put Sasuke's life in jeopardy and people would ask questions that would lead to the truth. If people start to think that Sasuke has been plotting with the emperor for a long time, all hell would break loose. Without even proof, they would say this was all a ploy by the two Uchihas to gain control of the cages, and by extension the great villages. This peace would collapse. Gaara found it to be bitterly amusing that a simple rumor was a side reason for state of the shinobi world. Most of it was a lie, but the people believed in it worked for the good. That is an alternative, but things would have never come to this point. No matter how we may wish, a different past would not have resulted in this present. Our past choices are what brought this reality. If we had made different choices back then, we would be facing another reality. Good or bad. That is for the imagination to figure out, Gaara said. Besides, I have always believed that if I stick with you, we would see a better tomorrow. There was honesty in Gaara's voice. Naruto was quick to note, but offered to comment on it. Is that so? He said in a thoughtful tone. She didn't have anything to do with it, did she? Gaara smiled. Actually, she did, he said. She has been the one who kept telling me that you're not a bad person and eventually things would turn around and now they have because I chose to trust her judgment. I guess I must thank her, Naruto said. Why were people saying that he wasn't a bad person? He was a cold person who cared for his own only. He didn't care about peace, or how the world was shaking. He cared about his fun and the family he has created. You can't forget about his people. Naruto reasoned having no desire to be a sage for peace didn't make him a bad person, but just a normal person. That would be a first. Mei butted in. Possibly, Naruto said, despite being in knowledge of the fact that Mei was a little sarcastic when she said those words. I believe Hamura would be saying I believed something like this would happen while Hagoromo would be trying to lecture me about being a real sage. What? Naruto shook his head. Nothing. I'm just mumbling about the Sage of Six Paths. The monk who taught ninjutsu and preached peace. No and yes. He didn't teach ninjutsu. He taught ninshu. I am a sage as well and wield powers he held. He used his powers to try to unite the world. Naturally, he failed, but created a legacy for himself. You should try to be like him, Gaara offered. Naruto turned to face the Godime cage to try to discern if he was joking or not. He wasn't. He was dead serious. Naruto found it to be amusing. He being like the very man he ridiculed. It was funny. He couldn't quite even imagine himself being all humble and peaceful while preaching peace to other nations. His amusement was visible to those around and Mei was quick to say something. Is something fun? She asked, a bit forcefully. Your image has been ruined. You're no longer the god you once were. This will be a good time to reinvent yourself as Uchiha Naruto, the Sage of Peace. Naruto looked at Mei with a raised brow. He had no words to her, so instead he just shook his head. Improving your image will ensure that your children are treated as children of a legend wherever they go. Your name will go down in history as not only the strongest shinobi to have ever graced the land, but the greatest. I prefer just being known as the strongest, Naruto said with a wave of his hand. I came to talk to you, Mei. Gaara wanted to excuse himself upon hearing that, but Mei insisted that he not move. The cage relented only after he saw a threatening look from the woman. It seemed like Naruto wanted to talk about personal and he didn't want to be in the room. Talk. For so long I have been guilty for my actions, lack of rather. I know and can point out when things are wrong or right, but you're never going to see me trying to correct what is wrong. I have acknowledged before that I have treated you unfairly, but still did nothing to change that. So, Mei said, looking at the side of the emperor. Naruto ran his hand through his hair, just beside it, his left eye turned to face Mei, and he spoke, his tone resigned. I'm sorry for not telling you about Itsuko. That was wrong of me. I should have told you. Are you saying sorry because your time is coming soon and you wish to enjoy the rest of your days? No and yes. I wish to enjoy the last days and I can only think of it with you being part of that life, Naruto said. A Megakure according to Conan, Nagato knew he couldn't win a battle against him, yet he still made his way towards the battlefield to face him. What was there to achieve if he knew he would end up dying? Had he simply been tired of living? Did he feel that he needed to end his life with bang? A Megakure was at peace, the crying village no longer cried continuously. The people of the village could now see the sun, and be showered by its light. Did his dream just end there? It didn't. But Conan had said Nagato had known. Naruto shook his head, he couldn't get an answer. Well, no matter, he wanted to say. Calmness and balance was within reach and he could rest. There was nothing to worry about. Nagato was dead. It wouldn't change anything if he figured out what the man thought. It wasn't like he was going to adopt a new lifestyle just because some parts of him had a few questions that needed to be answered through actions. Nothing much had changed for him. Naruto looked down the empty streets beside the tallest tower. He was sitting on the edge of something like a balcony, his feet hanging over the air. The rain he had made was washing him with drops of cold water, but he didn't mind it. He allowed himself to be watered. There was nothing interesting in the streets, but his eyes stared down, mind gripped with the emptiness that was in the streets. If I didn't know any better, I'd assume you were having some heated discussions with yourself, Sasuke said, walking over to Naruto. The emperor showed no outward reaction to Sasuke's presence, even when he sat down on his right. Kakashi knows what I want. Obito probably told him that he was expecting me to stab him in the back. Hardly a surprise, Naruto responded with a bit of nonchalance. Sasuke nodded. I didn't deny it. I was surprised that he seemed relieved when I didn't try to hide anything. He even said he wouldn't be saying anything to Tsunade or the head clans, but would support my quest to become Hokage. There are a few strings attached, presumably. Yes, but they are hardly a consequence, Sasuke said. By the time I become Hokage, things should be well set for a new change. Although Kakashi hates the workload, he won't hand over the mantle anytime soon. This works better for me, nonetheless, I can see to it that the Uchiha is built on a strong foundation. You're speaking years. I don't have that much time. Sasuke shrugged. It isn't like you're going to be dead anyway, he said. The second part has to unfold and in order for that to happen, you have to be there, just until I become Hokage. Can you work around Konoha's opinion of me? They may no longer fear me, but they don't like me, Naruto said. We will do it steadily. I will do something. They've always favored me. I can color them and by the time I become Hokage, you and I will shake hands like Hashirama and Madara. Is that so? Sasuke nodded. Aside from this, what are your other plans? I have no other plans. I'm content with just watching children fool around and for the sake of it, I will entertain them. Sasuke raised a curious eyebrow. You're not the one for that. Do you really plan on playing the humble emperor until you grow bored of it? Even though Naruto didn't say anything in response, Sasuke knew he had heard him. And he guessed the answer to his question was obvious, hence Naruto didn't say a word. Sasuke didn't say anything else, however. He just kept his silence and allowed the rain to wash over him.